Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a management technique called managing up. I'm going to discuss what it is, what kind of situations in which managing up might be a useful technique, what kind of value it provides to an organization, how it might look differently within different cultural contexts, how it can be seen and fostered within an organization, and some potential challenges that one might encounter when attempting to employ this technique. So, what is managing up? Managing up is a management technique for direct reports to restructure their professional relationships and interactions with their supervisors. Many definitions emphasize the fostering of personal relationships, but this is not absolutely necessary, as what's really important is to keep the objective of managing up in mind. And this objective is really to foster open communication in order to understand a supervisor's management style and to clearly establish expectations and what the employee can provide in order to maintain optimal performance. What this does is create a mutually beneficial relationship. And this is really what should be strived for when employing this skill. There are certain scenarios that where managing up might be very useful. The first of which is if you have a high workload. In many cases, high-performing employees are given additional work. This is often because their supervisor knows that they can perform at a high level and accomplish the necessary tasks. Fortunately, although this is increasing their work experience and exposing them to new opportunities, it could degrade their performance in the long run and potentially lead to burnout. In this case, managing up might involve expressing concerns about their personal performance when having such excessive workload. By discussing and establishing these expectations, the employee is not making excuses regarding why they can't perform properly, but rather expressing their needs in order to be successful. Another example might be receiving feedback. In many companies and organizations, feedback is only given once a year, which is during annual evaluations. This limits the ability for an employee to understand their personal strengths and weaknesses. And not being able to do so limits performance and doesn't allow the employee to adapt to what the supervisor is really looking for. By managing up and specifically discussing performance with their supervisor, direct reports can get a better understanding of what is expected of them. And this comes back to the idea of establishing expectations. Another scenario might be if an employee has unused skills or qualities that can actually benefit the organization. It's possible that an individual has certain abilities that their supervisor doesn't know about, but in reality could be very valuable. By opening up the lines of communications and emphasizing these abilities, an employee might find themselves to be more useful and especially especially if they're ambitious, might find themselves with new opportunities and the ability to grow professionally. The supervisor might also be able to utilize them more appropriately, which makes them look good as well. So, I've discussed a lot about what managing up is, and all of these aspects really add value to an organization because it allows companies and organizations to better utilize their employees. It allows the supervisor to look good themselves because now they're creating a team that's more productive and more synergetic. The employee themselves might be able to establish a better work-life balance if they're given too much work, or allow them to manage their time more appropriately. Potentially even develop new skills that could lead to a promotion or further progress within the organization. So, what about cultural differences? Similar to many of the management research and styles we've studied throughout the course, managing up has primarily come from a Western-centric viewpoint. but this doesn't necessarily mean that it can't work within other cultures. Considering the concept itself, managing up, we can examine Hofstede's cultural dimensions individually and make an analysis of how a supervisor might be more or less susceptible to being upwardly managed. So I've chosen 3 specific dimensions to talk about, although each dimension can be analyzed separately at every level, high or low. I'll start with uncertainty avoidance. If a supervisor has a high uncertainty avoidance, it's very likely that they will want regular updates and possibly take it to the level of micromanaging their direct reports. Japan, for example, according to Hofstede, has a high uncertainty avoidance, and it's a perfect example because they have a word in Japanese for this culture of what we might call micromanaging in the US, which is called Horenso. In Horenso, the supervisor expects to be closely involved in decision making and assisting in making small changes before a final draft or presentation is produced. When the direct report or the employee that is being managed by this Japanese supervisor is involved in Horenso without understanding it, they might get frustrated or feel that they're being micromanaged, especially if they're used to a more hands-off management style. But if they understand in advance that this is a cultural expectation, they can be more prepared to communicate with their supervisor, and before allowing it to become a frustration that damages a relationship or causes tension within the team, they can approach the supervisor in order to properly understand what they expect of them so that they can respond appropriately. Another dimension is power distance. If a culture, whether a supervisor or a direct report themselves, have a culture of high power distance, it could potentially be extremely delicate with regards to using the managing up technique. Since managing up specifically deals with approaching and creating open conversations with the supervisor, a high power distance might make such conversations uncomfortable for the employee trying to employ the technique, or potentially very inappropriate in the eyes of the supervisor, which could degrade the relationship even further. So, how do we deal with this? Well, one approach is ensuring that the employee using managing up frames the conversation so that the supervisor understands that they are the ones standing to benefit from working with their direct report in a different manner. Another dimension might be individualism. Coming from a highly individualistic culture could be one of the easiest when it comes to both responding to and respecting managing up. The reason for this is because, according to Hofstede, individualistic cultures are expected to express their desires in order to attain them, very similar to in the US, as this is one of the primary strategies within managing up, explaining exactly what's needed to perform more effectively. This could resonate well with both a direct report that comes from this culture or a supervisor that's used to this form of interaction. So in reality, when thinking about it from a cultural context, managing up is not only a technique for reestablishing professional relationships with the supervisor, but it can also be used to understand what a supervisor's expectations are and how to meet them from a cultural standpoint. Since it involves engaging a manager in direct conversation regarding the workload or performance, clarifying questions can be used for the employee to understand which cultural context their supervisor is coming from and how it might affect their management tendencies, and from there can adapt appropriately. Not only do organizations have cultural nuances, but organizations do as well. Within certain organizations, there may be a culture that actually prevents managing up from being an option. This would be a situation where either geographically or structurally, as in there's a large physical distance between the employees and their supervisors, similar to in the Sun Micro case, or hierarchically, in which there's no medium for managing up, where the suggestions are ignored by the managers because decisions are made so strongly from the top down. NASA and Thiokol, for example, might have had a culture, according to what we read in their cases, in the case, that prevented the ability for managing up to properly take place. On the other hand, a company such as Burt's Bees, in which recommendations are taken into legitimate consideration, have created a culture open to management from the bottom up. Within the Burt's Bees case, we saw specifically when the cleaning team recommended using steam instead of liquid to clean the tanks. This resulted in a win-win situation for both the cleaning team and the management team. Steam took less time, so the cleaning team was able to complete their work more efficiently, and the management team was able to save resources, save money, and themselves were seen more positively upon by their supervisors. So organizations like Burt's Bees are fostering an environment in which managing up is a positive. Other organizations can do so by emphasizing aspects such as participatory management, in which employees of a business organization take an active role in the decision-making process as it relates to business operations. Strategies for doing this might include improving information sharing by opening up transparency and allowing employees to both understand why decisions are made, as well as providing suggestions for changes. Organizations could also offer forms of mentoring or training by having cross-training. By cross-training employees throughout the company, they can encourage them to think differently and bring their unique skills to other parts of the organization. In addition, providing mentorship allows employees to hone their knowledge, increase their overall performance, as well as their loyalty to the organization. With regards to managing up, participatory management goes hand in hand because it provides methods for an organization to demonstrate their confidence in its employees and that they value their abilities by encouraging them to express their needs and therefore become more valuable themselves within their role. So what are some potential challenges? There are contexts in which managing up might actually be inappropriate or would damage the relationship of the individuals if it isn't appropriately respected and understood. I already gave an example earlier about power distance and how such a dynamic might actually make it more challenging. So another example might be that if the manager and the employee are from different ethnic groups or from nationalities that have a long history of mistrust. It doesn't necessarily mean that managing up is impossible, but the need for open communication between mistrustful individuals might not be productive. Other management techniques might need to be employed, possibly bringing in a third party, but because managing up requires the open communication, requires the respect, and for the two to listen to one another. If there is this historical context where they disagree or don't trust one another, then it could actually be detrimental and counterproductive. So, finally, managing up really is an important tool that, in particular, middle managers need to have a firm grasp of and regularly keep in mind if they want to be successful. This technique can be used as a tool to identify cultural differences for individual supervisors. Different supervisors have different styles, different techniques of their own, and come from different cultural backgrounds. So understanding them is essential. Managing up specifically allows you to get a good idea of your manager's culture and understand more appropriately how to work with them, as well as helping them understand how to help you. The technique is not a silver bullet because of some of the challenges I mentioned earlier and some of the cultural differences. However, it is something that if organizations can encourage, they can maximize productivity and consistently receive new ideas from individuals deeper within the organization, improving the value of their employees and creating a sense of loyalty.